I mean, and that's, I'm thinking about this because on Wednesday, we have a new governor, and it's hard to say how his staff is going to respond when a group of us go into his office with these signs and say, Sarah Palin talked a lot about being a maverick and sticking up to special interests, including the oil industry in Alaska. Why can't you do that a little bit? We've got this giant budget deficit. Part of the reason for that is because we've allowed the special interests in the oil and mining companies to not pay their full share for too long. Will that involve civil disobedience? Will we be told that we have to leave by the highway patrol? It happened a couple of years ago. It probably won't happen. It might. Does that make the action? Does it make the action more worth doing if somebody gets arrested? I don't know. I think it's just the question. For me, the real question is there is structural violence in this society. Part of why I come to this church on Sunday is because I feel a need to confess my sins as a member of a society where there is a lot of structural violence that I have some responsibility for. There is societal sins that no matter what I do personally, I'm implicated in them. And I think there are 45,000 Americans who will die because they don't have health insurance this year, and we can do that. To me, is that type of structural violence, and I think it's kind of tragic because we're at a time when our president is actually proposing that for the first time in the history of our country, healthcare actually is a right for people in poverty. I have questions about how the healthcare bill that they're proposing in D.C. will impact middle class people. I think they actually kind of designed it to leave them alone as much as possible. But in terms of how it impacts people in poverty, for the first time in the history of our country, if you're in poverty, you're eligible for Medicaid, which is the same way that seniors are all eligible for Medicare. And I think that's, but then at the same time, we've got state legislators who are seriously going to be talking about cutting, up to 40,000 people off our state Medicaid program this coming year. So you've got this sort of, do we care about human rights in this country? It's an interesting moment to be alive. So thank you for inviting me to participate.
Thank you, and we have some time for questions, and you can come up here if you'd like to use the microphone to ask the question, but I think if you just speak up clearly out there, it'd be just fine. If you want to direct the question to a particular panelist, feel free to do so. It's time.
I can never sit still. One of my questions is I love the idea of getting people together to fill out the forms for food stamps from various states. And my question is because I work up at the university as a doctor, how do you get that event to happen when it's so hard, people are so entrenched in their political stances that it seems like any interaction is distilled down into sound bites? How can you get them into a room to actually experience or have that face-to-face, seeing the humanity of what's sitting in your emergency room, or filling out the forms for Medicaid, or walking up to a pharmacy and getting a bill for $850 that's more than your rent? How did you manage to do that? Because I've tried inviting people to picnics and support group meetings for some of our patients, and everyone's too busy. And so how do you break through that wall of the I'm busy, I'm booked, whatever?
Well, with that specific event, part of why we were able to get the director of the food stamp program to come, there were two things. One was that we had a new director, and maybe she didn't know what she was getting into, but I think actually, I think more accurately, the reason she came was because her staff had told her that we had bugged the crap out of her predecessor, and were in fact probably part of why her predecessor, there was enough controversy around her predecessor. It wasn't all our fault, but we might have been the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of making her predecessor leave. And so, I mean, you know, this was the final event. It wasn't the one where we actually got the person we were trying to influence to say yes. And so, I mean, in that particular case, I mean, you just have to I mean, we've been working on the issue for at least 8 months before this event, consistently, persistently, and so, I mean, I think that's part of it, was that they, and and they also, I mean, we organized, they knew we had developed also some credibility with her staff, in the sense that they knew that we were, that we were going to invite the press, that there was a good chance, I mean, Crossroads has been around long enough, there was a good chance that they would come, and then they would have to explain why why she was too busy to come and compare her own food stamp application to ones from other states. So I mean, I think, you know, it was it's easy to tell the story as if there was just this one thing we did and it was amazing, and to forget that, you know, we had been working for 8 to 12 months to make that event possible.
Any of the other panelists have anything to say about creating conditions?
Her frustration is actually a good example, I think, of what pushes people to undertake direct action or civil disobedience, or both. Because you've got these colleagues you think should be paying better attention. And I don't know what you can do that's dramatic and legal or morally defensible, but that's exactly the frustration I think a lot of people, and I'm very familiar from the Vietnam era, which I was quite active in various kinds of civil disobedience, as well as activism that involved creating structures within the structure to subvert it. But that frustration about people aren't listening, so what are you going to do? And I don't know what you can do that would be palatable to your colleagues and get their attention and get the right kind of response. I mean, you could get their attention with some kind of action that could actually just turn them off entirely. I would say, see, that's what you get when you get too liberal, or whatever it is people use to justify dismissing your concern.
I would say, personally, looking at it, that the only way to speak truth to power, when you don't have power, is with style. And so that's a little bit about the context of what Bill was talking about being media savvy and knowing when you have an opportunity there. So I think that's kind of one approach you can take, is when power doesn't have to listen to anything. So how do you make them listen? You have to disarm them. Any other questions out there? John?
Yes. Our labor and our social justice movements